In 32 years of studying nuclear warfare, I have spent considerable time thinking about what the last 30 minutes of normal life would look like. Not in the abstract philosophical sense that strategic analysts sometimes allow themselves, in the operational sense. The specific 30 minutes between the moment a nuclear launch is confirmed by American early warning satellites and the moment the first warhead reaches American soil. I always hoped it would remain a thought experiment. It stopped being a thought experiment at 3:47 this morning. At 3:47 a.m. Eastern Time, the space-based infrared system, America's constellation of early warning satellites that monitors the entire surface of the Earth for the thermal signatures of ballistic missile launches, detected 50 simultaneous launch signatures from positions across North Korean territory. Not one, not five, not a test sequence, 50. The Siebers alert transmitted to NORAD within 90 seconds of detection. NORAD's confirmation assessment, the process of cross-referencing satellite detection with ground-based radar tracking to eliminate false positives, was completed in 4 minutes. The confirmation was unambiguous. 50 Hwasong-17 intercontinental ballistic missiles, launched from dispersed positions across North Korea, on trajectories whose computed impact points span the continental United States from Seattle to Boston. At 3:53 a.m., the chairman of the Joint Chiefs transmitted the launch notification to the president. At 3:54 a.m., the United States moved to DEFCON 2, not DEFCON 3, the elevated readiness that the Russian doctrine activation produced. DEFCON 2, one step from nuclear war. The last time America was at DEFCON 2 was October 1962, and simultaneously with the NORAD confirmation, in a transmission whose content has since been partially reconstructed through signals intelligence, Kim Jong-un transmitted a message through the North Korean state media channel to the international community. 4 words that no strategic analyst has ever expected to read in an active nuclear crisis. Iran asked us to. 4 words that transform a North Korean nuclear launch from a bilateral crisis into the operational confirmation of a multilateral adversary coalition that American strategic planning has been specifically designed to prevent. 50 missiles, 30 minutes, DEFCON 2, and a coalition that has just demonstrated it will use nuclear weapons on behalf of its partners. Tonight, I want to walk you through exactly what 50 Hwasong-17 ICBMs mean for American missile defense, exactly what DEFCON 2 requires American nuclear forces to execute right now, and exactly what Kim Jong-un's 4 words mean for every strategic calculation about nuclear deterrence that the international system has been built on. Tonight, I want to answer 4 questions that no mainstream commentator is addressing with the honesty the next 30 minutes demand. First, what is the Hwasong-17 and what does 50 simultaneous launches tell us about a North Korean ICBM program whose capability the Western defense establishment has consistently underestimated? And what does the specific trajectory analysis of 50 missiles aimed at American cities tell us about a targeting logic that reflects years of deliberate planning rather than improvised crisis response? Second, can American missile defense intercept 50 ICBMs? Walk me through the ground-based mid-course defense system, its interceptor inventory, its engagement geometry, its demonstrated test record, and give me the honest assessment of what the intercept mathematics look like when 50 maneuvering warheads are inbound simultaneously on trajectories designed to exploit known gaps in American defensive coverage. Third, what does DEFCON 2 require? Walk me through the specific operational measures that American nuclear forces are executing right now, measures that go significantly beyond DEFCON 3, and explain why the transition to DEFCON 2 is the single most consequential military posture change in American history since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And fourth, what do Kim Jong-un's 4 words, Iran asked us to, mean for the strategic architecture of the adversary coalition that this conflict has crystallized? And what does a world where nuclear weapons are effectively available for use by coalition partners on behalf of each other look like for every aspect of nuclear deterrence theory that has organized global security for 80 years? Stay with me. 30 minutes. If you came here for the analysis that takes 50 inbound ICBMs as seriously as the 30-minute countdown demands, subscribe now, hit like. Share this immediately with anyone who needs to understand what is happening right now. Leave your assessment in the comments. I read everyone. Now let us get into this completely. We do not have time for anything else. Let me start with the weapon because the Hwasong-17 is not the primitive ballistic missile that Western commentary has historically used to dismiss North Korean nuclear capability. It is the most capable ICBM that North Korea has ever tested. And 50 of them in simultaneous flight represents a strike package whose characteristics demand honest technical assessment rather than the reassuring underestimation that American public communications have consistently preferred. The Hwasong-17 is a liquid-fueled intercontinental ballistic missile with a demonstrated range exceeding 15,000 kilometers, sufficient to reach any target in the continental United States from launch positions across North Korea. Its payload capacity supports a single large warhead, assessed at between 200 and 500 kilotons, or a multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle configuration carrying between 3 and 5 warheads, depending on the specific yield range trade-off selected for the mission. If the 50 launched missiles carry single warheads, 50 American targets face nuclear impact. If they carry MIRVed warheads at conservative 3-warhead loading, 150 American targets face nuclear impact. The warhead configuration of tonight's launch has not been confirmed by American technical assessment. The trajectory analysis provides partial information. The 50 missiles are not aimed at a single geographic area. They are distributed across a targeting pattern that spans the continental United States, with computed impact points clustering around 6 categories of target. National Command Authority targets in Washington and its surroundings. Strategic nuclear force targets. ICBM fields in Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming. Submarine bases at Kings Bay and Bangor, bomber bases at Minot and Barksdale, military command and control targets, NORAD at Cheyenne Mountain, strategic command at Offutt, Indo-Pacific command at Camp Smith, naval infrastructure targets, Norfolk, Bremerton, Pearl Harbor, industrial and economic targets, the port infrastructure, the energy grid nodes, the manufacturing centers that sustain American military production, and population centers, not as primary targets in the traditional counterforce sense, but distributed in a pattern that maximizes the psychological and social disruption whose second-order effects on American response capacity exceed the direct physical damage. This targeting logic was not improvised in response to a crisis. It reflects years of deliberate North Korean targeting analysis, the product of an intelligence effort that has studied American strategic geography with a thoroughness that should have been treated as the warning it represented. The Hwasong-17's guidance architecture is the dimension whose honest assessment the Western defense community has been most reluctant to provide publicly. American missile defense is calibrated against a specific threat model, a North Korean ICBM whose guidance produces a relatively predictable terminal trajectory that ground-based mid-course interceptors can model and engage. The Hwasong-17's tested performance has consistently demonstrated terminal accuracy that implies a guidance architecture more sophisticated than the threat model assumed, and the 50 simultaneous launches, the first operational employment of the system at scale, will provide the definitive assessment of whether the threat model was accurate. That assessment will arrive with the missiles. I want to address the missile defense question with the honesty that 50 inbound ICBMs demands, because the public communication about American missile defense capability has been calibrated for political reassurance rather than strategic accuracy. And the gap between political reassurance and strategic accuracy is the gap between what Americans believe about their protection and what the intercept mathematics actually produce. The ground-based mid-course defense system is America's primary defense against ICBM attack. It consists of 44 ground-based interceptors, 40 at Fort Greely in Alaska, and 4 at Vandenberg Space Force Base in California, whose kill vehicles are designed to intercept ICBMs in the mid-course phase of flight above the atmosphere before they begin their terminal descent toward American targets. 44 interceptors against 50 incoming missiles. The mathematics begin badly and compound from there. The inventory problem. 44 interceptors against 50 missiles produces a negative intercept margin before accounting for any other factor. American missile defense doctrine allocates multiple interceptors per target, typically 2 to 4, to compensate for the individual interceptor reliability that testing has demonstrated is significantly below 100%. At the 2 interceptor per target allocation that minimum doctrine requires 44 interceptors can address 22 targets against 50 incoming missiles, 22 of 50 at maximum theoretical performance. 28 missiles reach their targets at minimum. That is the mathematical floor of tonight's outcome. 28 nuclear warheads detonating on American soil, before accounting for the additional factors that compound the intercept problem. The testing record. The ground-based mid-course defense system has a tested intercept success rate of approximately 55% in controlled test conditions specifically designed to maximize intercept probability with advanced knowledge of the target's trajectory, launch time, and flight parameters. In an operational scenario, without advanced knowledge of trajectory, with decoys and countermeasures against maneuvering re-entry vehicles, the operational intercept probability is assessed by independent analysts at significantly below the test record. At 55% test intercept probability, 44 interceptors against 50 targets, before accounting for operational degradation, produces an expected intercept of approximately 24 missiles. 26 reach their targets. At the operational degradation that independent analysts assess, the expected intercept falls further. The decoy problem. North Korean ICBMs, based on observed test telemetry, carry countermeasure packages that include decoy re-entry vehicles designed to complicate the kill vehicle's discrimination between real warheads and decoys. Each real warhead accompanied by decoys requires additional interceptors to address the decoy threat before the real warhead can be engaged. The decoy load of the Hwasong-17 has not been publicly confirmed. Its effect on intercept mathematics, if present, is to further reduce the number of real warheads that the available interceptor inventory can address. The coverage gap. The ground-based mid-course defense system's coverage geometry, the engagement envelope within which interceptors can reach incoming missiles during the mid-course phase, has specific geographic gaps whose existence reflects the original design focus on North Korean and Iranian threats approaching from specific azimuths. The 50 Hwasong-17 trajectories are not all approaching from azimuths within the optimal GBMD's engagement geometry. Missiles aimed at East Coast targets from North Korean launch positions follow trajectories that are at the edge of or outside the GBMD's optimal engagement envelope from Alaska-based interceptors. The honest mathematical assessment of tonight's engagement is this: a significant number of the 50 inbound missiles will reach their designated targets, not because American missile defense has failed in the sense of performing below its designed capability, but because 50 simultaneous ICBMs exceed the designed capacity of a missile defense system that was never resourced for the scenario it is now facing. I want to walk through DEFCON 2 with the operational specificity it demands, because DEFCON 2 is not DEFCON 3 with additional measures. It is a qualitatively different nuclear posture whose specific operational requirements reflect a level of nuclear readiness that the American military has not executed in 60 years. DEFCON 2 is the posture in which American nuclear forces are prepared for imminent nuclear combat, not alert, not ready, prepared for imminent nuclear combat. The specific measures that DEFCON 2 requires go significantly beyond DEFCON 3 in ways that matter operationally. The bomber force. At DEFCON 3, a portion of the bomber force is on ground alert, armed, fueled, capable of being airborne in 15 minutes. At DEFCON 2, the entire available bomber force is either airborne or in the process of becoming airborne. B-52Hs are taking off from Minot and Barksdale right now, not to fly to their targets, but to get airborne before the inbound missiles arrive at their bases. An airborne B-52H cannot be destroyed by a nuclear warhead aimed at its home base. A B-52H on the ground can. The bomber dispersal is not an offensive measure. It is a survival measure, ensuring that the bombers survive the inbound attack so that they remain available for whatever retaliatory or second strike mission the National Command Authority orders. The submarine force. At DEFCON 2, ballistic missile submarines at sea receive the alert notification that places them in launch-ready posture. Missiles targeted, launch procedures initiated to the final pre-authorization step, crews at battle stations. The submarines are not launching. They are one authenticated launch order away from launching. The distinction between those two states is a two-person authentication procedure that takes approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds from battle stations to first missile away, the land-based force. At DEFCON 2, the 400 Minuteman III missiles in their silos received the alert notification that places them in launch-ready posture, targeting solutions confirmed, launch-enable switches positioned, launch crews at battle stations awaiting authenticated launch orders. The Minuteman IIIs are not launching, they are receiving updated targeting solutions in real time, as the inbound North Korean missiles' trajectories are refined by tracking radar. If the National Command Authority determines that American ICBM fields are among the inbound missiles' targets, and the trajectory analysis suggests they are, the decision about whether to launch the Minuteman IIIs before the inbound warheads arrive becomes the most consequential single military decision in human history: launch on warning. The doctrine that American strategic planners have debated and refined and ultimately maintained since the Cold War, the doctrine that authorizes launching land-based missiles before inbound warheads arrive to destroy them, is being considered right now in the White House, with 30 minutes on the clock. The command authority. At DEFCON 2, the presidential emergency satchel, the nuclear football, is open. The authentication codes that authorize nuclear weapons employment have been verified. The president has been briefed on the inbound assessment, the intercept probability, the retaliatory options, and the launch on warning decision, and the decision that every American president has hoped never to face, the decision that nuclear deterrence theory was specifically designed to make unnecessary, is on the table, with the clock running. I want to address Kim Jong-un's 4 words with the strategic seriousness they demand, because those 4 words are not just a statement of motivation. They are a declaration of a new nuclear architecture whose implications for deterrence theory, for American alliance commitments, and for every nation that has relied on the nuclear order organized around mutual assured destruction are more consequential than the missiles themselves. Iran asked us to. Nuclear deterrence theory rests on a foundational assumption. The assumption is that nuclear weapons employment is a sovereign decision made by the state that possesses the weapons in defense of that state's vital interests, under circumstances where the costs and risks of employment are borne by the employing state. That assumption produces the deterrence logic. A state will not employ nuclear weapons because the consequences, retaliatory nuclear strike against its own territory, the destruction of its own cities, the deaths of its own people, exceed any benefit achievable through nuclear employment. Deterrence works because the costs fall on the decision maker. Kim Jong-un's 4 words have shattered that assumption. If North Korea launched 50 ICBMs at the United States because Iran asked it to, if nuclear weapons employment is available as a service that one member of an adversary coalition can request from another, then the cost-benefit calculation of nuclear deterrence has been permanently altered. The state that requests nuclear employment bears no direct cost from the employment. Iran requested the strike. North Korea executed it. American retaliation falls on North Korea. Iran bears no nuclear cost for a nuclear strike it initiated through a coalition partner. That asymmetry between who makes the decision to initiate nuclear employment and who bears the cost of the retaliation is the most dangerous strategic development in the history of nuclear weapons. It creates an incentive structure in which a nuclear-armed coalition member can initiate nuclear conflict at zero direct cost to itself by routing the employment through a partner willing to bear the retaliatory consequences. North Korea's willingness to bear those consequences reflects the specific strategic calculation of a regime whose survival has always depended on making itself too costly to eliminate. Kim Jong-un has calculated that the American retaliatory strike on North Korea, the response to 50 ICBMs aimed at American cities, is a cost that the regime can absorb in the specific sense that regime survival after American retaliation is more likely than regime survival under the Iranian-led coalition's alternative, which is a North Korea that refused to act when the coalition required it and faces the consequences of that refusal in a post-American influence regional environment. The calculation is internally coherent. It is also the calculation that makes every nuclear deterrence framework built on the assumption of sovereign decision-making obsolete. Because if nuclear employment is available for coalition use, if the most destructive weapons in human history can be employed on behalf of a partner who bears none of the retaliatory cost, then deterring nuclear use requires deterring not just the state that possesses the weapons, but every state that might request their use. That is not a deterrence problem that any existing framework can address. It is a deterrence problem that the next generation of strategic thinking will spend decades trying to solve. In Moscow, the North Korean launch has produced a strategic situation that Russian planning did not fully anticipate. Not because Russia was unaware of North Korean capability, but because the specific sequence of events that led to Kim's 4 words reflects a coalition decision-making architecture that has evolved beyond what any individual member fully controlled. Russia is now managing a crisis in which its own nuclear forces are at elevated readiness, DEFCON 3 on the American side, Russian responsive posture on the Russian side, and a third nuclear state has launched 50 ICBMs at the United States on behalf of a fourth state. The escalation management problem that Russia faces is the same problem that every other government on Earth faces in the next 30 minutes. American retaliation against North Korea is certain. The scale of American retaliation, whether it is proportionate, whether it is existential for North Korea, whether it extends to Iranian territory in acknowledgement of Kim's 4 words, is the variable that determines whether this crisis ends with North Korea's destruction or expands into the general nuclear exchange that no government on Earth can survive. Russia's interest is in preventing the expansion. Its leverage over that expansion is limited by the fact that the decision about whether to extend retaliation to Iran will be made in Washington in the next 30 minutes, before any diplomatic communication can reach the decision maker. In Beijing, the calculation is the most urgent and the most consequential of any capital outside Washington. China shares a border with North Korea. American retaliation against North Korea, even conventional retaliation of the scale that 50 ICBMs demands, produces nuclear, radiological, and humanitarian consequences on China's northeastern border that Chinese planning has specifically sought to prevent for 70 years. Beijing's communication to Washington in the next 30 minutes, whatever its content, is the most important diplomatic message transmitted since the Cold War, not because it will stop the inbound missiles, because it will determine whether the American response is calibrated to stop with North Korea or extended to the coalition that North Korea declared it was acting for. In every American city whose name appears on the Hwasong 17 targeting analysis tonight, Washington, New York, Seattle, Boston, Norfolk, Cheyenne, the 30-minute clock is running. For most of those cities' residents, the clock is invisible. The emergency alert systems that would notify civilian populations of inbound nuclear missiles have not been activated. The decision about whether to activate them, whether the 12-minute warning that notification would provide is worth the panic that it would produce, is among the decisions being made right now by people who have 30 minutes and no good options. I have spent 32 years preparing analytically for a moment I hoped would never arrive. 50 ICBMs in flight, DEFCON 2 declared. A coalition that uses nuclear weapons on behalf of its partners, and 30 minutes. The 30 minutes that nuclear deterrence theory spent 80 years trying to ensure would never begin are running, not as a thought experiment, as an operational reality whose outcome will be determined in the next few minutes by decisions being made by people under a pressure that no human decision-making process was designed to manage. The strategic question that this crisis poses, the question that will define nuclear strategy for every generation that follows this one, assuming generations follow, is the one that Kim Jong-un's 4 words have crystallized. How do you deter nuclear employment when the state that employs the weapons is not the state that decided to employ them? How do you impose costs on the decision maker when the decision maker is insulated from the costs by the architecture of coalition nuclear use? I have studied nuclear deterrence for 32 years. I do not have a satisfying answer to that question, and neither does anyone else. Here is the question I want you to think about and answer in the comments. If nuclear weapons are now available for coalition use, if a state can initiate nuclear conflict by requesting employment from a partner who bears the retaliatory cost, what does deterrence actually mean in a world where the decision to use nuclear weapons and the consequences of using them fall on different actors? Because from where I sit, watching 30 minutes countdown, the answer is that deterrence, as we have understood it for 80 years, assumed a world that no longer exists, and the world that replaced it arrived tonight with 50 missiles and 4 words. Tell me what you think. Like and share this if the analysis delivered the depth this moment demands. Subscribe for the work that goes where the mainstream will not. I will see you in the next one.